Hello, good afternoon. This is Attorney Michelle, of course, your instructor in criminal law and jurisprudence on criminal law, book 1. So, before I proceed with my presentation today, we will be discussing the basic principles on criminal law, especially on the characteristics of criminal law in the Philippines. But before I proceed with my presentation, I just would like to congratulate Mr. Neil Bantilan for submitting for being the first person to submit the answers to the survey form that we have conducted last August 12. And because of that, Mr. Bantilan, you are exempted from taking the quiz in today's class. Again, to Mr. Neil Bantilan, you are exempted from taking the quiz in today's class. So with that, before I proceed, I would like to inform everyone that I do hope that you take the time to listen to our discussion this afternoon, because definitely we will be having a short quiz. Okay, so please take down notes, especially the provisions that I will be constantly repeating. Again, please take down notes, especially on the provisions that I will be repeating. All of you are required to take the quiz, as that will be your attendance for today, and as well the quiz will be properly recorded. But for Mr. Neil Bantilan, you are exempted from taking the quiz. However, you are not exempted from watching this video. Okay, so today's class will be pre-recorded, meaning we will be conducting the lecture asynchronously. I have pre-recorded this video presentation so you can view the presentation during our class hour. We will not be online. We will not be conducting the lecture online, but then again, we will still have the class. It's just that my presentation is pre-recorded. So, because we will be having a quiz right after the class, I again reiterate that you take down notes, especially on the important principles, on the topics that I will be discussing today, because we will be discussing the basic concepts of criminal law, and I do hope that you will take the time to read on this as well as to study on this, because these concepts, they always appear on exams. But again, I repeat, Mr. Neil Bantilan, you are already exempted from taking the quiz. However, if you do wish to take the quiz, it's okay. But again, you are exempted automatically for submitting our evaluation form as the first person to submit. Then you are exempted. So that's it, class. I'm always giving out some sort of prize to persons who follow my instructions, to students who take the time to do the things that I ask them to do. So again, to everyone who would want to be exempted in our next quizzes and our next recitations, I hope that you take the time to listen to my instructions, as well as to take the time to answer any quiz or any activity that I am asking you to do. Okay, so anyway, that's it for today. I'll be discussing the very basic provisions on the introduction of criminal law. So again, our subject is criminal law and jurisprudence. So uh again, I reiterate, you have to take down notes, because definitely the questions that will be given in our quiz will be taken from my discussion. Okay? So again, I am Attorney Michelle Basal, and I will be discussing the topic on the general principles of criminal law. Now, okay. So, in our prior meetings, I've always asked you whether you already know the definition of criminal law. However, so far, none have answered me. So now we will settle this one because apparently, of course, there are so many sources. But when it comes to criminal law in the Philippines, you always have to refer to the revised penal code, especially on the general provisions of criminal law. So the revised penal code defines criminal law as the branch or division of law which defines crimes, treats of their nature, and provides for their punishment. So these are the basic concepts of criminal law. Criminal law will give you the definition of a specific crime, such as homicide, murder, parricide, bigamy. So they will define each crime. So that is in book 2. Likewise, criminal law provides the treatment of each of their nature. So we will know whether these types of crimes are light felonies or will have a greater punishment depending on the category to which they belong. So in terms of penalty and punishment, we will also be discussing that in our future classes. But for now, let's define, I repeat, criminal law is that branch or division of law which defines crimes, treats of their nature, and provides for their punishment. So criminal law is different from crime, okay? Because the crime is the act committed or the omission, the failure to act of a person which was demanded of him. Okay? Because crime is an act committed or omitted. When we say omitted, it means that such person failed to do an act which a law or a certain penal law or a certain criminal law, type of criminal law, commands him to do. So it is both in the positive or the negative. It's either the person committed a specific act which is defined as a crime or a felony, or the person has failed to render such act which considers him someone who has committed or omitted a such violation. Okay, so again, criminal law is defined as that branch or division of law which defines crimes, treats of their nature, and provides for their punishment. While crime, on the other hand, is an act committed or omitted in violation of a public law forbidding or commanding it. So again, I remind you, please take note. Whenever I repeat some provisions, take note of them because definitely they will appear in our quiz. And these two things are very, very important, especially in the concept or in the general concepts of criminal law. So take note. Next. So there are things that we have to consider when we are studying criminal law. So unless there be a particular provision in the penal code or special penal law that defines and punishes the act, even if it be socially or morally wrong, no criminal liability is incurred by its commission. Okay, so for the government or for the state to be able to adequately punish or penalize the person for an act or omission, such act or omission must be specifically defined in the penal code or a special law. Because an act, no matter how wicked, no matter how vile, even if it's on the verge of something so bad, right? So something so wicked, it cannot be punished unless there is a specific law that defines it to be a crime. Karuyag signon, no? In our own terms, the government cannot punish someone who has committed something which is not actually defined in a penal provision or a special penal law. Likewise, court decisions are not sources of criminal law. So we have several sources of criminal law. However, the decisions of the court are not sources of criminal law because they merely explain the meaning of criminal law. Okay, they merely interpret the meaning of criminal law and apply the law as enacted by the legislative branch of the government. Okay, so take note, we have so many court decisions. But these court decisions, they do not form part of our criminal law because at the end of the day, our criminal law is enacted by the legislative branch of the Philippines, not by the judiciary. So we have three branches of the government: the executive branch, which is headed, of course, by the president. Second is our judiciary, which is, of course, headed by the Supreme Court. And lastly, our legislature, the House of Representatives, and our Senate, which forms part of our National Congress. So among these three, the executive branch, the judiciary, and our legislative branch, it is only the legislative branch which has generally the power to enact laws, especially penal laws. That's why when you vote for your congressman, when you vote for your senator, think about the types of advocacies that they are actually espousing. Do not vote for them just because they are famous actors, famous politicians, because at the end of the day, they are so powerful. They actually have the power to enact, to promote, to promulgate laws of our land. So that's how powerful they are. So again, exercise your right to vote properly. Okay? So next, so crimes mala inse are felonious acts committed by dolo, malice, or culpa or negligence as defined in the revised penal code. So when we talk about dolo, we mean malice or criminal intent, while culpa is negligence. So under the crimes mala inse, lack of criminal intent is a valid defense except when the crime results from criminal negligence. So most of the time when we talk about criminal law or those laws defined under the revised penal code, we are always looking for intent to kill, intent to commit such act. Because otherwise, without such intent, the person who is being indicted for such crime could be set free by the court because intent is an element of crime. Okay, so in crimes mala inse, because intent is a necessary element to prove a crime, then good faith or the lack of intent is a defense. So if a person has killed someone but he did not have any intention to kill him, or his main intention, his intent was to inflict injury, but by inflicting such injury he was able to kill such person, he cannot be indicted for murder, but he can be charged for homicide because of the lack of intent. Because in murder, the lack of intent to kill is necessary ground to exonerate the person from such crime. Okay, so um under crimes by means of dolo or under crimes mala inse, the requisites of dolo are the following: freedom, which means that the crime was committed freely by the person and that he did not act under any compulsion. So later on during our classes, you will find out that if a person has committed a crime under compulsion, he can be exempted from such crime. Okay, because that is actually a justifying circumstance. So we will have a full discussion on justifying circumstances. But for now, again, we have the requisites of DOLO, which are freedom, intelligence, and intent. So if a person is committing a crime, he should do it freely without the compulsion of any other person. Pero yung sigmon, waray hiyagin pirit nga himuon ini. For example, may daw sa nga tawo nga he was actually coerced to steal from someone's pocket kay ang naghimuhan coercion ha iya is gintutukan niya hinpusil, and that being so because of his fear of getting shot, he did the act. But again, the lack of freedom, because he made such act under such compulsion or such fear, the lack of freedom can actually exonerate him or can actually free him from liability. Next is intelligence. The person must know what he is doing or what he is omitting to do. The person must have a comprehension of the morality of what he is doing, and although knowing it is evil, decides to do it anyway. So though that's why we actually have accepting circumstances in relation to insanity. Kay ito sa nga tawo nga has no control of his mind cannot commit a crime because of the lack of intelligence. So if a person who is insane commits a crime, he cannot be held responsible for that because under the revised penal code, intelligence is a requisite for the commission of a crime by means of deceit. The lack of intelligence, such as insanity or imbecility, could actually free a person from liability. Number 3, intent. The person must have a criminal intent to do an evil or cause injury to another. Remember that one who acts without freedom necessarily has no intent to do an injury to another. One who acts without intelligence has no such intent. But a person who acts with freedom and intelligence may not have to do an injury to another. So, we have very important principles to discuss. So, actus non facit reum nisi mens sit rea. So mens rea, it's actually referring to intent, meaning the act itself does not make a man guilty unless his intention was so. So even if the person has committed a crime, but if he did not intend to commit such crime because of certain circumstances following his actions, then there is a probability that he cannot be held liable for such crime because of the lack of intent. So you always have to remember that. These three, freedom, intelligence, and intent, if the crime is by means of malice or DOLO, the three should be present. Freedom, meaning the person who committed the crime has done so out of his own volition and he was not coerced to perform such act. Number 2, intelligence. The person must know or must have the moral capacity to know that what he is doing is evil. That's why we do have exemptions or exempting circumstances under the revised penal code, such as insanity, minority. So these are things that actually are taken into consideration that can exempt a person from criminal liability. Number 3, intent of the person. So this one is very important because the lack of intent can actually exonerate a person. But then again, this is only for crimes under mala INSE. Okay, so those crimes which intent is a requisite or a requirement. Because there are also crimes by means of culpa or negligence. Culpa means fault. When the offender commits a wrongful act resulting from imprudence, negligence, lack of foresight, or lack of skill, the act is called culpable felony. The main difference between intentional felonies, there is criminal intent, while in culpable felony, there is no malice or criminal intent. So there are actually crimes that can be committed because of our negligence. That's why we have reckless imprudence resulting to damage to property, reckless imprudence resulting to homicide, because actually we can be held liable for commission for crimes even if we did not intend to do such crime, but because we did not have uh such foresight, such skill, or or we had such negligence or imprudence in performing such act which resulted to damage to another person or injury to the another person, then we can still be held liable for that. So for culpable felony or felony by negligence, the following must be present. The person must have freedom while doing an act or omitting to do an act. So again, the freedom should be there. He should not have been coerced by another person to perform such act. So waray hiya perita, waray hiya hadluka. Ikaduha, he must have intelligence while doing the act or omitting to do an act. Again, it is similar to by means of dolo, because here the intelligence should also be present. Because again, generally those persons who are insane, imbecile, or minors are those minors between 15 years old and 18 years old, but did not act with discernment. So later we will know what is discernment. Okay, so these are actually accepting circumstances. Lastly, he is imprudent or negligent or lacks skill or foresight, and while doing the act or omitting to do the act, imprudence indicates deficiency of action, failure to take the necessary precaution to avoid injury to a person or damage to property. Usually, involves lack of skill. Negligence indicates deficiency of perception or failure to pay proper attention and to use the diligence in foreseeing an injury or damage. It usually involves lack of foresight. Okay, so that's why we have those cases, as I mentioned earlier, when, for example, a person driving a motor vehicle hits a person and as a result kills him instantaneously. Then the case there that should be filed is reckless imprudence resulting to homicide. Or if he damaged some properties because of such accident, he could be held liable for reckless imprudence resulting to um, damage to property. Now let's go to crimes mala prohibita. So before we have been talking about crimes mala inse, those which are intentional crimes or culpable crimes. Now let's go to mala prohibita. So crimes mala prohibita are those considered wrong only because they are prohibited by statute. So unlike murder, for example, murder, homicide, rape, they are considered as crimes mala inse because they are inherently evil. Okay, but in crimes mala prohibita, these are actually actions that are not inherently evil, but are just considered wrong because they are defined to be wrong by a certain special penal law or statute. Okay, so for example, gambling, illegal gambling. So the act of illegal gambling is not exactly evil per se, right? But those persons can be held liable for illegal gambling because a certain law has been enacted that prohibits illegal gambling in the Philippines. So that is an example of a crimes mala prohibita. So in crimes mala prohibita, they constitute violations of mere rules of convenience designed to secure a more orderly regulation of the affairs of society. For example, again, jaywalking. So, jaywalking is not inherently evil. It does not cause a lot of damage to the government or to property or to any person. But at the end of the day, because it is the responsibility of the government in our society to ensure the safety as well as the orderly regulation of the affairs of the society, there are laws that are passed prohibiting such actions, such as jaywalking. So, again, it is different from intentional crimes because here in crimes mala prohibita, intent is not actually a requisite for a valid for a person to be held validly liable for such crime. So generally they are prohibited by special law, and good faith is not a defense. For example, so I have actually a concrete example on this one. So under the SSS law, uh, the Social Security Act of the Philippines, all employers are required to register their workers to the Social Security system within 1 month of employment. So the law says the employer shall register the worker to the Social Security system within 30 days of employment. Okay? So the law requires them to do that. The employer should register the worker. So if in case the employer fails to register his worker or fails to pay the sufficient monthly dues to the social security system, such employer can be held liable for a criminal offense under the Social Security System Act. Again, even if the employer says, "Oh, I don't know about that law. I'm not aware of that law." So I was not able to register the worker because in good faith, I thought in good faith that I did not have I did not have the responsibility because I thought it would take 6 months for them to work for me before, or they should at least be a regular employee before I register them. But under the law only says the requirement of the law is that the employer shall register the worker to the social security system within 1 month of employment. So it does not indicate that the employee should be a regular employee of the company. So there, because good faith is not a defense, the employer raising such defense that he did not know of such law can still be held liable for violation of the Social Security System Act. Okay, so in this again, the non-enrollment of the employee by the employer to the social security system is not inherently evil. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it is an evil act. But then again, because such law was designed to secure a more orderly regulation of the affairs of the society, to ensure that employees are covered by social welfare benefits, then it still constitute as a crimes mala prohibita. So crimes mala prohibita are generally uh, those which are included in special penal laws. Crimes mala prohibita. Okay? So um I think we have barely 30 minutes left in our class, but because I promised that we will be having a quiz during our class, I will end the discussions now on the definition between crimes mala INSE and crimes mala prohibita. But as I have earlier announced, we will be having a quiz after the class. So I will be sending the form for the quiz, or the link for the form for the quiz at around 4:45 p.m. so that you will have at least 15 minutes to answer our quiz for today. So I hope you learned something from today. You can actually review the video presentation, but I do hope that you were able to take note of the discussions that we've had, because I will continue to ask you in our next classes regarding these principles that I have already discussed with you. So for now, we will stop with crimes mala prohibita, and next meeting on Wednesday, we will be discussing the limitations on the lawmaking body to enact penal law. So I mentioned earlier that it is our legislature which is the power to legislate or to enact laws relating to penal or criminal law. However, there are certain limitations on that. Our Congress and our Senate cannot exactly enact or draft or make any type of law they wish to make, because we have limitations on that. And we will be discussing that on our next meeting. So for now, I will be sending the quiz or the form for the quiz soon. So you have 15 minutes to finish that. And I hope that you will take the quiz seriously, because that will be graded at the and that will form part of your final grade for this semester. So for those who will not be able to answer the quiz, I think you don't have any other excuse by not taking the quiz, because it is already done asynchronously, which means that you can do it whenever you want to at the designated time, of course, the designated class time. So um of course that will be deducted from your scores at the end of our semester, so take note of that. So anyway, I will not delay any further now, because I'm taking too much time already. So please prepare for our next meeting on the limitations of the lawmaking body to enact penal laws. And for now, we end with the types of crimes under criminal law. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone.